Here's a fun little Easter project. It's a wreath. I've made it very small so that it's easy to do as a tutorial. So you make two circles. I'm using 1.6mm aluminium wire for this framework circle. This is to make the base of the wreath. And so obviously you'll make them to the size that you want the wreath to be. And then I'm going to obviously connect the circle together. So at the moment I've just bound them around something circular to create that shape. I use one end to be the suspension link, so I've bent that up, and then I'm just cutting that down to size, creating a little hook, which means I can then just hook that into the stem, projecting stem for the suspension, and then I can squeeze that hook shut, and that gives me the outside circle of the wreath that is going to have the decoration on. So these wreaths can be made any size you wish. They can be made for any, seasonal time. So for Christmas, for, I don't know, Halloween even, for Valentine's, for Mother's Day, you name it. Or it could be a seasonal thing, autumn, winter, spring. So then the inner circle, so it depends how thick you want the wreath to be, is exactly the same. Make that hook, bend the stem up, hook it in, and then squeeze the hook shut. And if it distorts while you're making this, just put it back onto the circular mandrel that you created it around. And so this inner circular one is a bit too long. I've made it, that stem a bit too long. You see, it's going to sit within and just give me the base of the wreath that I want. And so that's the width of the wreath. So now I'm going to cut off the excess. You can see that the stem length is a bit much because I want to connect it. And I'll need more than just that one connector, obviously, otherwise it'll fall out. But I'm just leaving enough protruding so that I can make another little hook, and that gives me the space that will be the framework for the wreath. So again, squish and squeeze the hook around the outer circle. And now I need to fix that in a bit more permanently. So I'll need a bit more wire. So just cut some more lengths. And you probably only need two more. You probably only need 3 connectors. I mean, you might get away with 2. But, so again, little hook. And once you've got that on, squeeze that on. And that will just secure and connect those 2 circular frames together. So you only need little short pieces for this. But it just gives you a starting point, because otherwise those 2 circles are going to move around everywhere and it'll be like working with a live octopus. So again, I'm just trimming that down, and then I'll create another little hook that will link on to the central circle. And I probably need just one more, and then I can start wiring that framework. So this width is really up to you. If you want to make it really wide, you just create a smaller inner circle, or you create a larger outer circle, whichever. This is such a flexible way of making any wreath of any size for any occasion. But I've never done one for Easter, but I did have a couple of commissions this year for larger pieces, and I will show them to you right at the end of this tutorial. So if you hang on to the end, you'll get to see the bigger pieces that I made as commissions. So this one's just a smaller piece that you could just, put as a centerpiece or hang somewhere in the house to celebrate Easter with maybe a little Easter tree that you could make out of a twig. Right, so now I'm using my coiling gizmo, but you can wrap this around any mandrel, so knitting needle will do. So I've chosen some 0.4 green wire, and I've made a coil, and I'm just going to pull that, stretch it out, but not completely. I'm keeping the curly whirliness of it. So you can see I'm stretching it, but keeping the curl. And you can do this with any colour. I've chosen green as a base for my Easter one. You could carry on with the silver. You could make this in any colour wire, or keep to the silver, or silver and gold, or silver and copper. So I'm using this curly wire, and I'm going to wire wrap the curled wire around the circular wreath framework. Now you'll find when you start, just like me, it's going to get hooked on itself, it's going to get hooked on your jumper if you're wearing one, or whatever, you hooked on the jewelry you're wearing. It is, you've really got to hold it where you've bound it. And it's, a little bit of a fiddle, but just keep going, persevere, like anything. And I'm sure if you've got this far in wire jewelry, you know it is. There's a lot of perseverance in making jewelry, or any craft. You sometimes, it's a bit fiddly, it's a bit annoying, it hooks onto itself, but just take a deep breath when that happens. Don't give up too easily, because you'll get there in the end. Don't let the wire control you, you control the wire. So you use up all this stretched out coil, and just basically keep wrapping it. And it's got this sort of feel of being a base coat, sort of like a grassy base coat, rather than just wire wrapping straight on. I mean, if you wire wrapped the green wire straight on, sort of backwards and forwards, you would get a good effect. This just gives you a sort of more 2D effect. It sort of bunches it up and creates a nice sort of bit like if you had oasis, which is what most of these wreaths would be a sort of foliage or an oasis to stick your flowers or your whatever you're going to make on your wreath. So this is the same. It's my version of making it a bit more cushioned and a bit more 2D. Otherwise it becomes very flat if you're just wrapping and wrapping and wrapping. And also it makes the wire go a bit further. So there's one layer, and you'll probably need another layer. I can see all the gaps. So just make some more coils, green wire coils, or just do a variation of lots of different coloured coils, whatever you've got to hand. And keep wrapping. And actually the second layer that you wrap in will be easier, because it's a bit like Velcro. It wants to grip on to the other sort of indents of the coils, and so it'll be a lot quicker and a lot easier. It's always the first layer that's the fiddliest. And I think I'll need a bit more. Even that looks a bit barren, so I'm going to coil a bit more and wrap a bit more around. So there we have it. I've done my coiling. Now I want to put a few sort of decorations on it. I've got these little Easter chicks that you can buy anywhere online or in the shops. And I'm going to wire some green wire onto the little plastic base feet so that I can wire them on to my wreath, and that will secure them and connect them where I want them. The other little tip I'll give you is, if you did want to cover that wreath with a bit more colour, you could colour in with some permanent marker paints in green, or you could use green wire as your base of your wreath. So there's so many options. It's just I'm using what I've got to hand, and you just use what you've got to hand, and I'm sure it will look nice. This tutorial is just to give you some inspiration of what you could do, and it might spark something off. So there you have it. I've connected the 0.4mm green wire onto the feet, and you can see how you could just push it in to the wreath wherever you want it, and then bind it in position you know, into position or whatever you want. And you can also, I found these sort of jelly bean plastic beads, in fact, but I could wire those onto the frame. And I can also make some flowers to wire on. So here's a little idea. Here's a little daisy flower that you can create rather than a bigger flower. So this is how I make the smaller daisy flowers. I'm going to make one petal, so it's about 1 inch down from the end of the wire. I make a loop. So there's your first petal. And then carrying on across from that first one, I create another loop, crossing the wire over at the center, and then carry on again with another loop, a looped petal. And you just keep doing that to create 5 or 6 petals each time, crossing that center point. So it's a bit like if you were to doodle a flower. It's the same sort of thing. If you doodled it without taking your hand off the paper, this is how you would get those petals drawn. So once I've got my petals, so I'm going to do one more, so that makes 6, but you can do 5. And they don't have to be perfectly even, so you can see that's done. And then leave a tail. So leave, you know, a good 3 to 4 inch tail before you cut it off the spool. Now that short end that you left in the beginning, use that to connect all the wires at the center. So bring that across the center, and once it's connected everything there, just cut off any excess because you don't want it too bulky right at the center, and then just push the end down. So that's now holding all those loops in place where they've crossed over at the center. And you can then, if you want to, this is not mandatory, but you can just tap hammer the very tops of those petals. That just creates the petals to have a sort of flattened outer look, but it also makes the outer frame a bit more firm and work hardened and stabilizes it. And now if it's a bit distorted, don't worry at this point because you can sort that out in a minute. So with the long extended length, make a little circle at the very, very end with the tips of your round nose pliers, and then create a spiral. So wire wrap around and around and around that tiny circle that you made. So keep going until the wire spiral comes right to the center of the petaled flower that you have just created, and just push it in place. And now you can spend a bit of time pulling out and spreading and teasing out the petals that you made. And it's not perfect, but it gives the impression of a sort of, you know, fun daisy. And that just has a spring-like quality and represents flowers in spring. So to fix those on, you will need a little central bead. So find a bead that you want to use to hook them on. So now I'm going to connect everything together. So for the flowers, I'm using, again, a bit more of my green wire, the 0.4 mil green wire. You could use silver, you could use orange, whatever you have. I've just cut a length. I'm bringing it around the side of that bead that I'm going to use for the flower, twisting the 2 wires together where they meet, and just spin the bead rather than the wires. You'll find it much easier. You just spin the bead round and you get the twisted stem, and then cut off any excess. So you've got a nice long stem or stalk. So to connect the flowers onto your wreath, you'll push that through the central hole of the spiral through to the back of the flower. And then that gives you a way of pushing it onto the framework where you've made all that sort of coloured green coil. And then you can just wire wrap it to the side of your frame and connect it in and secure it, and just push away any ends. So you see how easy that is. And so you just continue with connecting everything onto the frame. Look where you want to put it. I think I should put it down, the little chick, maybe down in the center, because he's rather big for this tiny little wreath I'm making. So you see how you can just connect them with the wire stems in any way. So whatever you want to put on, whatever you have to hand, beads or little pieces, just put wires on them and then tack them on. It's a bit like sewing, where you want them on the framework. You could put little bows, all sorts of things. So here you go. I put 2 little chicks at the base. I'm now finishing off with my oval beads that look sort of egg-shaped. So that's why I've chosen these particular beads, because I thought they were rather sort of Easter eggy. Just push them in to those coils of green wire. And do I want one more? No, I think that's too many. I think I'm going to put another flower up there actually. So I'll make one more flower, and that will sort of finish off the top of my frame. So there we go. We've got all the beads in place. We've got one more flower. We just sort of like push all the wires down, make sure it looks even. If you need to add anything else, do. And then you just need a top bead or a bead to put at the top, and you can either put a wrap loop there, or you can roll the wire down like I am and create a double link. So I'm just going to even that off because it's a little bit too much wire. So I wanted just a double rolled link, and I'm just going to open up the 2 sides just to make it a little bit more interesting. There we go. Ended up looking like bunny ears now. So and then you just need to hang it off a ribbon or put it on a chain or whatever you want to suspend it from. You could add more beads for that and just make a little knot at the top so that it's ready for suspension. And really that's how I make these wreaths, and of course you can embellish them as much as you want. So just have fun creating your own designs, any size and shape, with any decorations that you wish. Thank you for watching.